May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Father, save me from this hour. No, God, I know you can't. I know that it is for this reason that I have come to this hour. On this fifth Sunday of Lent, we hear Jesus saying that the time has come. Next week will be Palm Sunday, and we begin that journey to the cross. And we hear Jesus. One of the things that is most important about Jesus, or at least to me, is that Jesus was so fully human. We hear Jesus say, Father, save me from this hour. We hear, gee, I'm upset, I'm worried about this. And yet he knows that it is for this very reason that he was given to us. We know that this, in fact, was a seminal reason for his life and ministry among us. The Gospel of John, which is different in many ways than the other Gospels, is full of signs and miracles. And theologians believe that the miracles were signs for John, particularly to point us toward God. That the words, even the very beginning, and the Word was made flesh, and at the beginning was the Word, we are always pointed to God. And so if we know that that is John's seminal meaning for us in his words, we know that Jesus came to show us the light being born in that feeding trough, that the light being born, that life being lived, but the circle of life, that God knows that the divine way that life happens is with life and death and resurrection. That's how we see it. And so that in the gospel this morning, we hear those very words, that is why I was sent here. We are called each year over and over again, those of us that follow the liturgical year, we hear this story over and over again. Yes, we hear it from different gospels, but we hear the life and the death and the resurrection. What are we supposed to know about that today? Why is it that we are here? What is Jesus trying to tell us today before we enter this Holy Week? We hear Jesus use that wonderful example. If a seed dies, the seed needs to break open. And then it needs to start to poke up through the ground, which if we're lucky, we're starting to see. I've got a neighbor that's crocuses are starting to break open and break through the ground. But we also know that those crocuses will die, and the cycle begins again. Sometimes we live in a world where everyone wants everything to be tidy, and if we do it just right, then we won't have to feel loss, or we won't have to feel pain or grief or failure. And yet God knew from the very beginning that as human beings, our life cycle is new life, new growth, death. And then what happens next? How do we learn and come through that new place? How do we learn and come to that new place? I remember when my kids were little, I remember one particular day at the playground, there was one of those McDonald's things, right? Where it got to be a twofer. You know, if you're a really good mother, you don't admit you did this. But I did this when McDonald's created those fabulous things called playgrounds next to their restaurant. And we could get the Happy Meal and then the playground, and we all got a break from ourselves for a little bit. And I remember my son was climbing up something and then he fell and he got back up, and one of the women looked at me and goes, "How can you let him just fall like that?" And I remember he was already upright, because of course I'm like, well, I must be doing this wrong. But he's already bounced back up and he's already, and I don't remember what I said, but I remember thinking, we've all got to fall. Like, I can't protect him from every fall. And so we see this all the time in our lives. We see how it is. Sometimes we have to learn something and we go into it. I mean, how many of us maybe have had a job and we've thought, oh, yay, I got my job, and you're in a job for a certain period of time, and then either maybe you lose the job, or maybe you need to move on. And then you get a new job. But maybe in the middle, there's this dark period of, what am I going to do? And why do I really need to leave? We have beginnings and we have life and we have endings. But how it is that we live that out as people of faith is really important, because like Jesus, we often want to say, you know what, God, how about we not do that? Thank you for the offer, but I'm good. I don't want to grow anymore. I don't want to be any healthier. I don't want to be any happier. I don't want to have a better job. I don't want to make more money. I want to stay in my rut. I love my rut. That's not what we say to ourselves, right? We say to ourselves, oh, God, I'll do whatever you need, and this feels like the right thing. But what we're really saying is, God, I'm not worthy of this. God, no, you must be wrong. How is it that we keep ourselves bound up instead of letting those deaths happen and move to new places? Before we lean into Holy Week, I want us to ask the question, how is it that we are rejecting resurrection? How is it that we're saying thanks, but no thanks? How is it that we're saying, no, God, thank you, I'm not, you've read my mail and you've got the wrong address? What are we doing? What are we protecting? Maybe we're protecting our old life. I remember years ago, one of my first jobs, I knew that I needed to go. I was being called to this other job and I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave, but I was busy. I was so frustrated with everything. I didn't want to leave, but God needed me to leave. What am I protecting? I was protecting my safety and my security. I knew what it all was. What are we obsessing over? What do we not want to give up? What do we not want to give up? I remember years ago when I knew that it was starting to get that I needed to give up drinking, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, at one phase I thought, well, maybe I'm diabetic. Then I thought, well, no, I can't possibly be diabetic because then I couldn't drink. Which makes no sense to the average person, but it makes perfect sense to the addicted person. When what is it that you're obsessing over? I can't do that because then my life would change. There's an old saying in recovery circle that says, maybe you've been brainwashed. And the answer is, well, maybe my brain needed washing. What is it that we're protecting? Most usually it's what we know. And what pain are we hiding from? What are we hiding from? Resurrection calls us outside our comfort zones. Resurrection calls us into a light that is a new and different place. Resurrection doesn't call us into the tomb. We're going to get to visit the tomb in the next couple of weeks. And if we're honest, most of us feel really comfortable there. How is it that the tomb is not our default setting? How is it that life gets to be our default setting? What is it that keeps us from living into the resurrection? You know, we are coming into a time when this, how do I want to say this? COVID is, many of us are being vaccinated. Within the next couple of months, we're coming into this place where we aren't going to know when COVID is past. From everything I read, we're not going to have a date. There are going to be stages, there are going to be times, and different ones of us are going to live with it and in it differently. But it's really important, for me at least, that we look at how it is we are coming out of this tomb and that we allow ourselves to be changed. There is a poet named David White, and he is very powerful. And he says, confession is a stripping away of protection, the telling of a truth which might once have seemed like humiliation becomes suddenly a gateway, an entrance to solid ground, even a first step home. To confess is to declare oneself ready for a more courageous road. What are we looking at? What is the courageous road that God is calling us to? That's our journey through Holy Week. That's our Easter question. This woman, Ellen Brasted, who is a professor at Harvard, says that as we move through this next stage of coming out of COVID, it's a fragile time. That for some of us, we just aren't sure. And she says there are stages just like grief. She said the first thing we need to do is we need to name our losses and our blessings. We need to name it. This past year has been a tomb like no other for most of us. Even if with God's grace we do not know someone that has passed, how much do we know someone that didn't get to have their high school graduation? I watched a friend of mine yesterday be ordained online with 5 people. God bless her. She was ordained, but in my world, in my life, ordinations are a celebration. They're very much like a wedding. And she is ordained, and it is well and good, but what is the loss? Do we know people that couldn't have weddings or funerals? Do we know people that couldn't be there with a loved one? But maybe we also get to name our blessings. Maybe we got to reacquaint ourselves with our homes. Maybe we got to find out, gosh, I have a backyard back there. Oh, look, I really like my living room. Maybe if I could get rid of all this stuff, I could find it. Maybe we reacquaint ourselves with things that we liked. Maybe we didn't know we liked doing puzzles. Maybe come to find out it was very centering and calming. So the first thing she says is, what have we learned during this time? Name our losses and name our blessings. The second thing she says is, don't make the mistake of wishing everything to go back exactly the way it used to be. One of my fears, everybody keeps saying, I want to go back to normal. I don't want to go back to normal. I want to be changed by this. I want us all to be changed by this. What have we learned by this time of being in the tomb? And what is it that we're resisting? What do we miss? What do we long for? And it's okay to not know. She's very clear in her writing that it's okay to not know, discover. But this doesn't need to be an event. And lastly, she says, you can start to dream again. Perhaps you could start to hope again. Perhaps you could start to wonder, what would I like to do? Many of us have spent a lot of our life doing what we had to do. I remember a couple of years ago, Bob and Georgia, I don't know if they still do, but they used to rent a cottage, and Bob had come back. And he told this wonderful story about sitting in a chair and watching this bird nest. And he told this whole story, and I don't remember the details of the story right now. What I remember is the peace. What I remember is the peace he'd had in that moment, the peace that he had come back with. That didn't cost I mean, I'm sure renting the cottage costs something, but there is so much about our lives that we can treasure, that we can have today. And so as we wonder, what is it that I am resisting about resurrection? What is it that I'm saying, no, God, thank you? And yet in the gospel this morning, we hear Jesus say, we hear Jesus surrender to what he knows is going to be a hard path. Excuse me. We hear Jesus say, this is what I'm here for, Lord. This is what I'm here for. And so this is what we too are here for. We are not here to be safe and to bury ourselves under a pillow. There will be days when you get to do that. We all do that. There will be days when we'll hide behind our family or our addictions or our heads or our hearts or our fear. We are human. That is why we lay that all at the foot of the cross. That is exactly why Jesus says to God today, I know that's why I'm here. I know that's why I'm here. So as we walk through these next couple of weeks, as we spend some time in the tomb, let us name our tomb, we decorate our ruts. Thank it. Thank the tomb. Thank you. I like my posters in my tomb. I like the times I've had in my tomb. I like my ruts. But thank them and say, maybe you're not serving me anymore. And most importantly, doesn't sound like you're using me very well in the world right now. So thank you, God. But I'm here for something else. And let us not reject the resurrection. Let it not be about bunnies. I love bunnies, especially the Cadbury eggs. But let it be about something more, because that is why Jesus came.